Each of two major faiths have one primary text, the Bible for Christians and the Qur'an for Muslims. For Jews, every moment, every change in what we do grows out of another piece of writing, another book. Every quarrel, I mean, you've heard the expression, 2 Jews, 3 opinions? That's at the minimum, at the very minimum. So, what is Torah? We can look at Torah in the narrow sense as the scroll, the 5 books that we all share. Another way of looking at it is, in Judaism, we say a person of Torah, a person of learning. Each of us in our lives is supposed to write our own Torah. So you can live a life of Torah, and in that way you write your own Torah. Some people take it to mean that you literally write an entire scroll. That's quite an undertaking, since a trained scribe writing a Torah scroll on the parchment of a kosher animal takes a year, working 10 hours a day. It is done with a quill and ink that is mixed specially for that purpose. Indeed, we are told that some scribes actually put some honey into their ink so that the words of the scroll are literally sweet. The Torah was compiled over a period of time. Traditional Jews believe that the Torah was given to Moses by God, and the words in it are immutable and perfect. Some of us, however, may not yet understand them, and that is, of course, our problem. Most conservative, Reform, and Reconstructionist Jews on the more liberal side of Judaism, reject Mosaic authorship and subscribe to some form of critical theory of authorship. We believe perhaps that Torah is divinely inspired. Many of us subscribe to the documentary hypothesis, which posits that there were actually 4 sources. By the way, we are doing Jewish Books 101 in about 10 minutes. So just to let you know, kind of need the background, and then we're going to dive, because we're going to go swimming around in a sea of Jewish texts. The Yahwist source from the German transliteration of the Hebrew word Yud-He Vav-He, which is unpronounceable. This is the holy name of God that has been lost to us, which the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest, used to say once a year on Yom Kippur in the Holy of Holies, when we had the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And it was handed down from high priest to high priest to high priest. We no longer have it. Jews don't even try to pronounce it. Generally, when we see Yud-He Vav-He, we say Adonai, which literally means my Lord. But Yud-He Vav-He has no pronunciation whatever in Judaism. We don't say Yehovah, we don't say Yahweh, we don't say Yahweh, none of the above. That is definitely a reading from other faith traditions. The E source uses God's name as El, or Eloheinu, our God, or Elohai, my God, and he is referred to as the Elohist. P, of course, are the priests, the Kohanim. Basically, they are given credit for most of Leviticus. And D, the Deuteronomist source, which came much, much later in the game, like 621 before the Common Era. And by the way, Jews in general don't use the terms AD and BC. We use BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, the Common Era. as AD in our understanding stands for Anno Domino, the Lord of our God, meaning Jesus. So this is why this is not, again, a Jewish take per se. Originally, each of the books was a separate document, probably based on a lot of the master tales and myths that were circulating around. Ours isn't the only flood story. There's certainly Gilgamesh among many others. The difference in our creation story, and of course there are others, is that the God of Genesis did not fight any other gods. The God of Genesis created ex nihilo, from nothing. According to Genesis, the world was tohu vavohu, void and without form. And God just did what God does, which is be the creator. So, the Hebrew Bible has 3 sections, the 5 books, which are known in Hebrew as Torah. The prophets are called Nevi'im, and the writings, Ketuvim. And the acronym for this is Tanakh. So if you ever hear a Jew referring to the Tanakh, he's referring to all of the Hebrew Bible. Okay, we don't use the term Old Testament and New Testament either, because New Testament, here, anyone have a kid studying for the SAT? Great word for them. New Testament, according to Jews, is a supersessionistic term. How about that one? Is that a great word? Okay. For Christians, and perhaps I think for Muslims, the New Testament in some ways posits a new covenant. We were fine with the old one. So we saw no reason to have a new one. You know, not like soap powder, we're good with what we got, and that's how we see it. So it's Hebrew Bible and Christian Bible. So what's in the Hebrew Bible? First of all, Breshit, Genesis, Shmot, literally names, Ele ha-Shemot, these are the names of, and it lists all of Jacob's kids. Vayikra, Leviticus. Vayikra in Hebrew means, and he, in this case meaning God, called. Personally, I do not subscribe to a masculine or a feminine God. We read in Genesis that God created the person, male and female, God created them. Well, God maybe is perhaps a hermaphrodite. That's a possibility. If God is both male and female, Hebrew is a gendered language. And we feel we have no word that you can't refer to God as a thing or an it. That would be disrespectful. So God is either going to be a male or a female when you're writing. And since generally it was usually men writing, they wrote in the masculine voice. No problem with that. I think God plays different roles. When I read in the Song of the Sea, Adonai ish milchama, God is a man of war. Yeah, I definitely can see that. But when I think of El Shaddai, the God of breasts, the merciful God, that for me is a more feminine. Or Harachaman. I think we share that term with our Muslim brothers and sisters. Rachaman in Hebrew is compassionate or merciful, and it comes from the Hebrew word meaning womb. What could possibly be a more compassionate image than a baby in its mother's womb? So Harachaman, certainly for me, a feminine image of God. Bamidbar, literally in the desert, in English, numbers. Sorry, that got left out of there somehow. And Devarim, literally things because the book starts out, these are the things. Deuteronomy, Deutero, second, and then law. Moving right along to the prophets. A prophet in Judaism is one who receives a message from God to transmit to the people. And that message had better be right, or it's a capital offense. Most prophets in Judaism don't volunteer for the job. Frankly, anyone who has half a mind would not volunteer for a job, say, going around telling people that you shouldn't be doing that, that's the wrong way to behave, society is going to heck in a handbasket. Who wants this job? So the purpose of prophecy, I think we could use some prophets today. Make corrections in the direction of society, to foretell the future. And by the way, there was only one prophet that God spoke to face to face. I heard the answer there. Moses, that's right. Other prophets God spoke to either in a dream or a vision. Prophets remind us what we're not doing right, and sometimes to deliver special messages to an important individual. If you remember the story of King David, and Nathan the prophet went to him and told him that he was not living up to God's expectations, to put it mildly. And these are the prophets, and the books of the prophets were written, again, over a long period of time. You will see 3 Isaiahs up there because Isaiah, if you've ever read him, is a huge book. There are huge discrepancies in style and context. So biblical scholars, not me, have hypothesized that there were at least 3 different authors of Isaiah. The writings, one of my favorite parts of the Hebrew Bible, includes the Psalms. I love the book of Ruth. I think it is one of the most beautiful universalistic texts ever written. It has certainly opened up the entire ancient world after Ezra and Nehemiah were closing it down and making it very difficult to accept anyone into the fold. The story of Ruth shows us, in essence, the first convert. She didn't have a Judaism 101 class. She didn't have to attend synagogue for a year. She didn't have to go to the ritual bath, the mikveh. What she did was make a declaration of faith. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you are buried, I will be buried. Can't get much more into the family than that. The Gemara, moving forward in time, is comprised of 2 books. The Mishnah, which is the first commentary on the Torah, was put together by Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, around the year 200 of the Common Era. And along with that, there were 2 concurrent streams of Talmud, another commentary on top of the Mishnah, that were happening in Babylon and in Jerusalem. So the most commonly read Talmud is the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, and it has its sister in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Bible, but they're very, very differently laid out and written. The Mishnah is divided into 6 basic orders, under which are many, many other headings. The Talmud follows the Mishnaic orders, and as I said, there are many things underneath. Seder Zeraim is the first order of the Mishnah, and under that heading, we have blessings, gleaning, produce bought from a person whose tithings are suspect, and it goes on. This is still, oh no, that was all, that was all Zra'im. This is Moed, holidays. So we've got Shabbat and borders, Eruvin, Pesach, Sukkot. We continue with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Purim. The Yerushalmi is much more streams of consciousness than the Babylonian Talmud. This is what a page of Talmud looks like. Okay, well, it's not as difficult as it looks like. In the center here, this is the Mishnah. And it is the languages used in the Talmud are Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and as we go further, for example, you see Tosafot over there, successors of Rashi, and Rashi is over here. Rashi was a French commentator of the 12th century. As we have later commentators, we have more languages. So French scholars who are studying ancient French will very often refer to Rashi because there's ancient French in the Talmud. The neat thing about Talmud is that all the opinions are included, even the dissenting opinions, because what may not have been possible or true then may be possible and or true now. Commentary continues to go on in the Jewish world. Next comes Midrash, and under the heading of Midrash are stories that some of you may think are actually in the Bible, but I promise you they're not. Anyone hear the story of Abraham working in his father's idol shop? Oh yeah, this is a Midrash that we are told that Abraham's father Terach actually was an idol maker. And he left the kid in charge of the shop one day, and when Terach came back, all the idols but one were smashed to smithereens. And in the hands of the biggest idol was a bat. So, a bat? Terach said to his son, "What happened here?" And Abraham said, "Well, Dad, you know, the big guy there, he was jealous of the other guys getting any of the offerings, so he just went around and smashed them." And Terach said, "What are you talking about? They're made of clay, they're made of wood, they're made of stone." And Abraham said, "Yeah, and you're worshiping them?" So this is Midrash. The rabbis wonder, we didn't hear anything about Abraham prior to the time he's about 75. What happened in the first 75 years? What was he doing? So the rabbis create backstory. And this, of course, was a great thing to do on a Shabbos afternoon, because what else? I mean, synagogue was high theater. Going to hear a good preacher on Shabbos, now this was the way to go. You had a little picnic, you brought the missus, the kids. A good rabbi will engage you for hours. So this is a lot of what the Midrash is. And of course, there were homilies. And then the other part of Midrash is the explication of law, halakha. The word halakha in Hebrew comes from the word to walk, literally to walk in God's way. The codes follow Midrash, and they are a super commentary on top of the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Torah. Are you beginning to see the layer cake here? Okay. Some of the most famous ones are the Mishneh Torah by Maimonides, Beit Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch by Yosef Karo, and the Darchei Moshe by the Ramah, Moshe Isserles. The interesting thing about the codes is that the codes are laid out in a way that the average, I would say the Jew in the pew, could find the subject he wanted and look up the law. Talmud and Mishnah don't give you the final answers. They give you all the arguments. This guy said this, but that guy said that, and this other guy said, and they're arguing across the centuries, and sometimes not terribly respectfully. There have been commentators who have pretty much said, that guy's an idiot. Where he got that from, I have no idea. But they're all in there, and that's what makes it most interesting. Nothing is cleaned up. Very little is cleaned up in the first 5 books, too, or in the prophets, which is why so many of us feel that they have to be true. They're not ideal people. They're people with problems and issues who make mistakes, like us. And now responsa literature, she'elot utshuvot. These are still going on. It used to be that there weren't that many learned people. And of course, when did Gutenberg start printing? Like 1400 and something? If you owned a book, wow. Wow. It was handwritten. It was precious beyond precious. Not until, I think it was the 1500s, was the first volume of Talmud printed in Italy by a fellow named Bomberg. And again, Talmud didn't give you answers. So there's a question back in the Gaonic era, around 900 of the Common Era. A husband wrote to Sherira Gaon in Babylonia, I married a beautiful woman. I love her dearly, but she doesn't want to have children because she is afraid that it will mar her body. People worried about such things even back in 900 of the Common Era. And you thought plastic surgery and Botox was only now. And Sherira Gaon wrote back to say that it was the husband's responsibility to reassure his wife that she was always going to be beautiful and that their children would be beautiful, and he would cherish her until her dying day. Sherira Gaon hypothesized that perhaps this young lady was not as vain and egotistical as her husband might have thought, but loved him so that she was afraid she would lose his love. It's one of my favorite responsum. I think that's very cool. Today we go on in responsa. We have things now like organ transplantation. They didn't have that back then. And there are halachot, there are laws that say you've got to be buried with all your parts. So there was a special squad, some of you may remember after 9/11, of ultra-Orthodox Jews who went around the site and were fastidiously trying to match up body parts so that people could be buried as much intact as possible. Because the Orthodox belief is that when the Messiah comes, you will be resurrected. And in order to be resurrected, you need all your parts. That's the Orthodox belief. My own personal belief is if God can resurrect from a pile of bones, God can resurrect from anything. And personally, I believe in a resurrection of the soul, not so much of the body. But that particular viewpoint spans all the denominations. There are different people who believe in different things. That one's mine. Electricity. Oh, has that caused some responses? They didn't have that. Nope. So if you're not supposed to make a fire on the Sabbath, is electricity considered a fire because there is a spark, whether it's very small or not, that is created when you complete a circuit? So when you flip a switch, are you making a fire? That one was debated a lot. Many Orthodox Jews to this day unscrew the bulb in the refrigerator so that they don't unwittingly create that circuit with the light going on. And they cook in a very careful manner. A very low light is left on a gas stove. Some of you may want to check your stove's instruction book. You may have a Sabbath timer on it. And what the Sabbath timer does is start that stove at a particular time in order to heat up your whatever. Most stoves today are made with them. I find that amazing and fascinating. The responsa writing continues to this day. A complete responsa generally looks to find an origin somewhere, somehow in the Torah, brings it forward into the Mishnah, through the Talmud, into the codes, to today. So that's, if any of you are into responsa writing, that's the process. Okay. I see God primarily as creator. The thing I feel we share most intimately with God is creativity. And when I read this piece from Exodus about Bezalel, who was the head craftsman for the construction of the tabernacle in the desert, I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom. Wisdom. Musicians were considered filled with wisdom. Midwives, women of wisdom. So I find this idea of internal wisdom, perhaps the amazing talent that you have, is a form of God-given wisdom. Your talent for cooking, for embroidery, for meeting with people, for being a peacemaker, a healer. These are all forms of creativity. That moment when you have that, oh, that for me is God acting through us in our lives. God willing, it should be for good. Let's see. There are certain rules that came to us from the Torah that did not exist for millennia prior. And I just wanted to apprise you of a few that I think we need to know about. Laws requiring justice and regard for one's neighbor. Not just the king. Your neighbor. The everyday guy next door. Not only may a man not harm his neighbor, but he was required to take positive action when a neighbor needed his help. You shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. You've got to get out there and do something. It went even a step further to protect animals, which is where many of our laws of kashrut, of keeping kosher, come from. We're told 3 different times that you may not boil a calf in its mother's milk. Perhaps a different way of thinking about it is cooking a baby in breast milk. It's what it is, folks. That's the analogy. The word kosher does not mean blessed. It does not mean clean. It means fit and proper. The word treif, which is used very often today in Judaism to indicate pork or shellfish, both of which are forbidden to Jews who observe kashrut, actually means torn. Treif, T-R-E-I-F. Something that is treifa is torn, meaning there were animals who were considered human beings even back then who would tear a limb off of a living animal. Some folks do it today, but treif means torn. There are laws in the Torah about the mistreatment of animals. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. And this is a guy you don't like. This is a guy that doesn't like you. But it's not about you. It's not about the guy. It's about the donkey. In fact, there's a midrash. There's a story about a donkey. Poor little farmer. Things were not going well. It was a bad year. He had to sell his beloved donkey. And he sold them to a very nice Greek fellow. And Sunday, donkey worked, no problem. Monday, the donkey's schlepping and walking and working. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, oh, did that donkey work. Friday morning, the donkey worked. Friday evening, the donkey laid down. Saturday morning, couldn't get him to move. Stubborn as a mule. So the Greek fellow went back to the little Jewish man and said, "What's wrong with this donkey you sold me? Sunday through Friday he was fine, and then yesterday he won't move." And the little Jewish man says, "It was Shabbos. He's a Jewish donkey." A person may not eat until he has fed his animals. So if you've got a dog or a cat or a goldfish at home, they get fed first, folks, because they rely on you. The Bible required and requires 1 day of rest in 7, not only for free men, but for servants, slaves, and animals. Now, we are all sophisticated people here, right? We know enough to take a rest when we need one, right? Wrong. Most of us don't have an off switch. I'm just going to finish this, and then something else comes. And we have no off switch. So God mandated an off switch. And my thought is, if it was good enough for God, if God thought it was necessary for God to take a break, who am I to argue? Am I better than God that I don't need a rest? I don't think so. But yeah, we don't know how to stop, so that's why it's mandated. The other thing I love about Judaism is that we can question God. Yisrael literally means the one who struggles or wrestles with God. I mentioned 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Well, I'm not alone. Abraham questioned God. If there were 50 people in Sodom and Gomorrah, would you destroy them? And God says, no, if there were 50, I wouldn't, but there aren't. If there were 40, even for 40, 30? Do I hear 20? Abraham, if there were 10, but there aren't. That's an amazing kind of intimate relationship, to be able to question God. Moses questioned God. After after Moses came down from Mount Sinai and saw us dancing around the golden calf, he was furious, God was furious, and God said, that's it, I'm doing away with them. And Moses goes, whoa, excuse me, what are all those other people back in Egypt going to say? That you took them out of Egypt only to kill them? How would that look to the neighbors? Habakkuk, not a very often read book, but one that is just beautiful. It's beautifully written. He brings out the idea that a Jew can challenge, question, and argue with God. And he opens up by saying, how long shall I cry and you will not hear? I cry out to you violence and you will not save? Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to behold mischief? For destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise. Habakkuk is out yelling at God. Something I do on a pretty regular basis. I figure God's got big shoulders. God can deal with it. In fact, that's kind of how I wound up being a rabbi, because God would just not leave me alone. Not that God was literally tapping me on the shoulders or something like that, but God just kept putting me into situations where I needed more and more knowledge in order to help people. I was a Sunday school teacher. I didn't have that kind of background. I mean, okay, I could read Hebrew. Like many Jews, I could read it. I had no idea what I was reading. Didn't have a clue. Unfortunately, this is the bane of having a Sunday school class that's attempting to teach a language. You can't teach a language in an hour a week. It's just not feasible. So I would say maybe 50% of Jews can read Hebrew, and perhaps 5% of those 50 might have an inkling of what they're reading. And I might be giving extra credit. I'm sorry to say that, but I think it's true. But people were coming to me and saying, can you help us with training my kid for his bar mitzvah? Can you help us? We don't belong anywhere, and we want to do an unveiling. An unveiling is when we take off the cloth from a tombstone for the first time in front of a family. It's not anything that's ordained by law, it's a custom. And in Judaism, custom often trumps law. The rabbis say, go look and see what the people are doing. And that is often what happens. We are not a fundamentalist people. We don't follow the Torah as written. We do not believe in an eye for an eye, literally. But we do believe, and we have tractates upon tractates in the Talmud talking about personal damages, compensation, embarrassment. 20% above that is what you're supposed to be compensating the person you inadvertently hurt. Sounds like insurance policies to me. But they are there in our scripture. We practice rabbinic Judaism. We do not practice Torah Judaism. So I finally had a showdown with God because God was really ticking me off. I hate feeling incompetent, and I was put in these positions where I needed more and more and more knowledge, and I didn't know how to get it. So I stomped out on the front lawn, and I said, listen, if you want me to do this rabbi thing, I need a car, I need books, I need money, and I need a place to stay. You come through on that, and we'll talk. And I stomped back into the house, having thought I just closed that particular situation, right? No problem. A week later, I was driving our 1983 Cadillac Sedan DeVille home from Mr. McNabb, the service station. She had just gotten a death warrant. Mr. McNabb said she needed a new engine, and it wasn't worth putting one in. So I came home, I told Edwin. Edwin said, okay, honey, I'll look after dinner. This is July. And he went out, came back in, he said, battery's dead. I said, oh? Gee whiz, I saw black clouds of smoke as I was coming home, but the battery was fine. Well, you must have left the lights on. I didn't have the lights on. Well, you must have had the lights on because the battery's dead. I did not have the lights on. Okay. You didn't have the lights on. Whatever you say, honey. Smart man knows when to back off. So he goes back out, looks under the hood again, comes running in. He said, did you know you had a fire in your harness? Cars have harnesses? I thought horses had harnesses. No idea cars had a harness. No, honey, it's an electrical harness. Oh. Well, excuse me, did you just say fire? Yeah, why? Because we're not insured for dead engine, but we're insured for fire. And the nice gentleman who came to look at White Lightning, that was the car's name, did not ask us anything about the dead engine. He just said, oh, you had a fire. And we said, yes, we did. And not being Catholic, I didn't have to worry about a lie of omission. So what they paid us for White Lightning got me a seaworthy car, if you will, but God had nothing to do with that. A week later, I got a call from Phyllis, the wonderful custodian at Temple Bethel. She said, Mel, you better get down here, Mel. I said, why? She said, well, they're getting rid of a bunch of books, and I think you may want some of them. Okay, what's a bunch? A box. 2 boxes. 22 boxes of books, including the Tanakh, including the Mishnah, including the Talmud, including codes. It is the basis of my rabbinic library. But God had nothing to do with that. And then I started interviewing seminaries. They thought they were interviewing me, but I was actually interviewing them. You see, I'm sandwich generation. I have an elderly mother, and I had younger kids. So before I embarked on this adventure, I had to make sure that there was enough flexibility for me in the schedule of a seminary before I started this. And I found that there was such a seminary, the Academy for Jewish Religion, and I accepted them, and they accepted me, so that was good. But I still didn't have a place to stay. I walk in the first day of orientation. A tiny little blonde lady walks over to me and she says, hi, my name is Peg and I'm suffering from empty nest if you ever need a place to stay. I give up. That's it. God came through, I had to come through, so here I am. Oh, I forgot about the money. Yeah, forgot about that. I was laughing with a friend of mine over the books and the car and being accepted, and isn't that ridiculous? And she said, yeah. I said, yeah, it is ridiculous. No, it's not ridiculous, but uh-huh. What are we discussing? I think you'd make a wonderful rabbi. Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. No, you don't understand. Okay, you're right. I don't understand. What are we saying? I could be your scholarship. Do you have any idea how much we're talking about? 150, 200,000? Yeah, I I think that would be a very wise investment in the people of Israel. Okay. I think I got the message. Yep, got the message, boss. So, let's see, do I have any more nice slides? I don't know. Saeed, I'm having a problem with the computer. Ah, did it move? No, okay, not moving. Okay, I think I have one or two more. It could be. Shut up and get lost. Okay, so yes, the Torah tells us that there are 613 commandments. And that's where I am going to end with you. Well, there were 613 commandments that Moses handed to us. As we stood at the foot of the mountain of Sinai, our dear Moses started to fuss. He threw 2 tablets down to the ground, and much to our surprise, the 10 commandments broke into pieces, and we couldn't believe our eyes. Try that with me. Well, there were 613 commandments that Moses handed to us. As we stood at the foot of the mountain of Sinai, our dear Moses started to fuss. He threw 2 tablets down to the ground, and much to our surprise, the 10 commandments broke into pieces, and we couldn't believe our eyes, because the Torah was much too long to describe all the Jews. Our God decided to write 10 commandments that said the don'ts and do's. Every commandment talked about the way we had to live. When we work or play or cook or clean, borrow, take or give. Well, there were 613 commandments that Moses handed to us. As we stood at the foot of the mountain of Sinai, our dear Moses started to fuss. He threw 2 tablets onto the ground, and much to our surprise, the 10 commandments broke into pieces, and we couldn't believe our eyes. As we stood at the bottom of the mountain and listened to Moshe, he asked how many wanted the Torah, and a bunch of us said, yeah. We thought about the way life was and the way life ought to be. Without the Torah, we would have been lost and stuck with idolatry. Well, there were 613 commandments Moses handed to us. As we stood at the foot of the mountain of Sinai, our dear Moses started to fuss. He threw 2 tablets down to the ground, and much to our surprise, the 10 commandments broke into pieces, and we couldn't believe our eyes. Thank you all so much. And now, if you have any questions, comments, I am happy to attempt. I make no promises at answers.